I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Year in Review. And today we're taking a look back at some of the most interesting, thought-provoking, and challenging conversations from the past year. We start with a conversation about Orange Shirt Day in a year that was defined by the discovery of unmarked graves at Canadian residential schools. Officials like BC Premier John Horgan and Indigenous Relations Minister Murray Rankin are urging Canadians to wear their orange shirts today to proclaim that every child matters. It is the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and Orange Shirt Day. Mr. Horgan says by wearing orange, people acknowledge the truth of the residential school system while honoring survivors, families, and communities. The statement says while the truth of what happened at the schools is well documented, people were horrified to learn of the findings of the remains of more than 200 children at the former Kamloops residential school. Well, joining us now to talk more on the importance of today is Mr. Bruce Baptiste from the Orange Shirt Society. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you.
Now, sir, the Orange Shirt Society has been around for quite some time, even before the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation was talked about. So tell us a little bit about your organization and how it came to be, sir.
So back in 2013, they had the Truth and Reconciliation Forum in Williams Lake, British Columbia, regarding part of the 94 recommendations for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And from there, Chief Fred Robbins from Askedam First Nation out at Alkali Lake, BC, Cookby Fred, had a vision of moving forward with the actual truth and reconciliation of the Orange Shirt Day movement, as our residential school in the Williams Lake area is only like about 10 to 15 minutes from Williams Lake. So that was his vision back in 2013.
All right, sir. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about your organization's mission statement and maybe even share a little bit about the work your organization has done since its conception in 2013?
So societies to Orange Shirt societies to support Indian residential school reconciliation, to also create awareness of the individuals, families, and communities, of intergenerational impacts of the Indian residential schools, and to create awareness of the concept of that every child matters.
All right, sir. Well, a lot of people are wearing their orange shirts today. What is the main message behind Orange Shirt Day itself?
Okay, it's again to educate and spread the awareness to the Canadian general public of what happened back in the residential school system that has affected many Indigenous children across Canada.
All right, sir. Now, considering that this is the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada, how will that play into your organization's commemoration of Orange Shirt Day itself?
So, in the past, before COVID, I think the last time we gathered was in 2019. There we'd have large gatherings at what we call the Botania Park, where we'd invite the general public as well as our school district number 27. The teachers would bring their students to the park to help commemorate Orange Shirt Day. I think it's and this year, unfortunately, due to COVID, we put out a video of local speakers to speak on behalf of, what National Day of Truth and Reconciliation means to them, as well as, the Orange Shirt movement.
All right, sir, we've got about 30 seconds left here, sir, but everybody's wearing their orange shirts. So what is something that you want every Canadian to think about today as they wear their orange shirts?
I would say for them to, be open to the education and the awareness behind Orange Shirt Day movement and what happened to the Indigenous children that have went to the Indian residential schools, the survivors, and to also recognize the ones that have passed at the Indian residential school sites.
2021 also saw a federal election. Despite a brief 36-day campaign, not much changed. The Liberal Party was able to form a minority government. We take a look at the government's priorities laid out in the throne speech. The Governor General delivered the throne speech today, and it included a promise by the government to work with the provinces and territories on improving the healthcare system as the country emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic. With inflation running at an 18-year high last month, the federal government is also promising to tackle the rising cost of living. The government also promised bolder action on climate change and to stand up for diversity and inclusion. Reconciliation was another major theme of the speech, delivered partly in Inuktitut by Canada's first Indigenous Governor-General, Mary Simon. With us to unpack the speech from the throne and what to expect from Parliament is Mr. Elliott Hughes, Senior Advisor at Summa Strategies. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's start with a quick overview of the speech from the throne itself.
Well, look, this was a very high-level throne speech. Not a lot of detail compared to the 2019 version. I think three things stood out for me. One, that high-level nature of it, not getting into too many policy details. Two, obviously calling out, what's happening out in British Columbia. I think that's on every Canadian's mind, hoping everyone is safe and sound there. And that, leads into one of the main themes that the government touched on, which is climate change and the environment. And then third, for me, this was Mary Simon's first throne speech as Governor General. You touched on it there in the opener. Great to see the progress that has been being made on that file, and the reconciliation file. Seeing a Governor General from Indigenous faith is fantastic, and shows that this is also another area that the government touched on during its throne speech as well.
And we saw a lot of key discussion points: reconciliation, climate change, healthcare. So from this overall speech, what do you think are the main priorities for the government right now?
Finishing the job against COVID-19 is number one for this government. They need to get that done and behind them so that the economy can pick back up. I would say environment is going to feature heavily in this parliament over the coming months, if not years. It is certainly a big focus for the Trudeau government, and you saw that today, but you also saw it from the election promises that it made. Reconciliation, which we just touched on, continues to be very close and important to the Prime Minister himself. And I would suspect with Mary Simon there as well, working together on some of those issues. Those would be the big three for me. And then finally, the fourth one, which is connected to some of those, is the economy, trying to rebuild the economy and that Build Back Better theme coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic.
And we know that on Monday, the government House leader outlined 4 bills to be passed before Christmas. So let's go over these 4 bills. And is it even possible to pass these bills before Christmas, this short timeline here?
Going to be very tight. It's going to be very tough over the next couple of weeks. Conversion therapy was one of them. Continued support for, more targeted COVID-19 support for specific industries were a couple of them. I think Mark Holland, a lot of the things that Mark Holland, the new House leader, talked about were echoed in today's throne speech. We'll see some of those more detailed one, including, protecting the rights of healthcare workers as they go on their way to work, and that they're not harassed and so on. That will also be a key focus over the next couple of weeks, but certainly lots to get through. I would imagine come January, February, you'll start seeing them starting to tackle some of the larger issues a lot more.
All right, Mr. Hughes, and what are you expecting to be some of the other legislative priorities for the government?
We saw mental health being talked about in the throne speech today, but the big one that I will be keeping an eye on is housing. The government made plenty of predictions or promises, I should say, in the campaign, including tax rebates, promising to build more houses, creating some new funds for new home buyers to access. That's going to be a big package for the government to get through. And certainly in today's economy, with housing prices where there are and people having that challenge of getting to that first home of theirs, this is going to be a big area of focus for the government. And I'm sure voters are going to be watching very carefully for that as well.
All right, Mr. Hughes, just about a minute left here, but considering we just got off an election in September, while this is a new parliament, in many ways it looks much like the previous one. So how are you expecting this parliament to function?
Unfortunately, it'll start off well, like most parliaments do, and then slowly start to, get worse and worse. But I do think that there is a chance for the government to be able to work more closely on targeted measures with the Bloc Québécois and the NDP. I don't think we should expect any formal agreements, but certainly there's a lot of alignment with each of the two opposition parties. And frankly, there's a lot of alignment with the Conservative Party and some of their policies. Will the Conservatives, want to work with the government? We'll have to see. Aaron O'Toole's much more internally focused at the moment. So I would suspect, like most minority parliaments, we'll see this last 18 to 24 months with the chance of it lasting a little bit longer.
All right, Mr. Elliott Hughes from Summa Strategies. Always great having you on Forum Daily, sir. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
COP26 was another major event. We took a look at what happened and what did not happen. Last-minute changes diluting crucial language about coal has been accepted by 200 nations at the Glasgow climate talks. Several countries say they were deeply disappointed by the change promoted by India to phase down rather than phase out coal power, the single biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. COP26 President Alok Sharma says the deal is a move in the right direction. In addition to the revised coal language, the Glasgow Climate Pact included financial incentives for poorer nations and solved a long-standing problem to help pave the way for carbon trading. Well, joining us today is Ms. Lisa Gu, the National Policy Manager at the David Suzuki Foundation. Ma'am, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Good to be back with you.
So firstly, can you guide our viewers through the major decisions or policies in the Glasgow Climate Pact?
This was a very important 2-week global meeting of countries who have pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and at such a crucial moment for climate action. A main task, as you said in the intro, was to define the rules for international carbon markets. And here, COP26 did adopt some basic social and environmental integrity standards to avoid, for example, double counting of emission reductions, and set in motion, at least, the building blocks to develop some systems here. There was also, as you mentioned in the introduction, a focus on international climate financing. Here, unfortunately, developed countries still came up short. It's been more than a decade now since developed countries pledged $100 billion a year to support developing countries in facing climate change, and developed countries have yet to fully deliver on that pledge. There were some new commitments made, and it is very important to continue a focus on providing that funding, and not only for reducing emissions around the world, because this is a global problem, but also in supporting poorer countries in facing the effects of climate change that have now become irreversible. Another important outcome from the conference was a commitment to return next year with the goal for countries to return next year with the goal of setting more ambitious emission reduction plans, which kind of speaks at the same time to the failure of COP26 to deliver the level of ambition needed to make the kind of difference we need to see. And finally, I would add that apart from the formal program at COP and the formal agreements, there were some very interesting and important side agreements, alliances formed between different countries. Very significantly, an agreement among many countries, including Canada, to end public support for foreign fossil fuel developments by the end of 2022. So that's a faster timeline than we'd seen in previous commitments, and a more comprehensive commitment, and also growing momentum to phase out coal-fired electricity, which is one of the worst climate offenders. And beyond that, a new international alliance called the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance that a small number of countries have signed up for. Canada is not at that table, but Quebec, the province of Quebec, did sign on. And these, I would say, are the countries leading countries to really now talking about the need to phase out fossil fuels.
Just over a minute left, ma'am, but I want to jump to the final text. We're seeing a lot of criticism around the text and the phrasing in this text. So phasing out coal was replaced with phasing down coal. So how exactly did COP26 address the issue of coal and fossil fuel subsidies overall?
Yeah, that was a disappointing compromise for sure. And I think on the whole, COP26 is widely recognized as a compromise and not going far enough. But if there's a silver lining, maybe it is that is widely recognized. And I think we're starting to see a bit of a turning point, perhaps, where the countries of the world are converging around the need to do more. With respect to coal, surprisingly, this is actually the first time that fossil fuels have been named in a COP declaration. So, it is at least getting us closer to addressing the source of the problem, which is fossil fuels. But that language and those commitments do need to be strengthened. And really, what it comes down to is implementation. So we'll certainly be keeping a close eye on the Canadian government as Parliament reconvenes next week to make sure it delivers on all of its commitments and more to reducing emissions.
Former Afghan interpreters now living in Canada and their allies rallied on Parliament Hill this Tuesday, calling on the federal government to bring their extended family members back to Canada. They argued that their previous work with Canada has left their parents and siblings back home at risk of Taliban reprisals. Ottawa has acknowledged the threat the Taliban poses to their families. Meanwhile, the first flight of refugees who supported the Canadian military mission in Afghanistan landed on Canadian soil on Wednesday. Joining us now to talk more on this is Mr. Christian Luprecht, professor at Royal Military College and Queen's University and senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hello, thank you.
So let's start with a quick overview of the role that Afghan interpreters and other staff played during Canada's mission in Afghanistan and why they and their families are now considered to be at risk.
Yeah, so there's, of course, the instrumental piece of making sure that you can communicate, but there's also a cultural sensitivity piece so that they're able to bring to bear advice on how best to interact with local populations and local knowledge that otherwise would be lacking and would undermine mission success. The question is, under what circumstances people sign up for that particular mission? Was it simply for the payment that they received, or was there a broader expectation that they might, as a result of their assistance to Canadian Armed Forces, one day have the opportunity to come to Canada?
Now, meanwhile, veterans and former interpreters have criticized the resettlement process. What are some of their suggested improvements to this process?
Yeah, so look, we could have anticipated this at the time we went to Afghanistan. We knew that we were using interpreters and we knew that we're going to pull out one day and that the situation was likely going to get very dangerous again. And so we should have anticipated that we owed a debt to these individuals. And I think what we missed here is, on the one hand, clarifying the conditions under which they were working with us in the first place. And on the other hand, making sure that their expectations match what Canada is able to provide. And so I think this is a strategic failure on the part of both former and current governments not having had sufficient foresight. And we need to learn from this for future missions to make sure that this debacle doesn't happen again.
Now, I really want to dig deeper into the background of this conflict here. So this conflict in Afghanistan has been called Canada's longest war. So what was the original objective of this mission, and did Canada and coalition partners actually accomplish it?
Yeah, I think we lose track of that. The objective was to make sure that Afghanistan would not become a safe haven for terrorists to launch international attacks, in particular on the West. And that mission was accomplished within arguably a year of coalition forces showing up in Afghanistan. But then we got what's known as mission creep. We're starting to do all sorts of other things, starting to fight the Taliban, even though the Taliban did not pose a terrorist risk to internationally. We started to engage in also civil society and state building sort of exercises. We're using the military, even though it was probably not the most effective instrument to achieve some of these ends. And so now we're surprised when we're getting the outcome that was entirely predictable 18 years ago. And maybe we should have had more foresight and pulled down the mission once we had a sense that the original aim of the mission had been accomplished.
So we're seeing, as you're saying, coalition forces are withdrawing from Afghanistan. The Taliban is making significant gains on the ground. You're saying this is unpredictable. Why is that, Mr. Luprecht? Or this is predictable, rather?
Yeah, because if you understand your history, and I think if in the West we had a bit more humility about our ability to bring change and to understand the conflicts that have beset societies in Afghanistan for centuries, then I think we would have had a more realistic outlook on what the prospects actually are and what an appropriate role for Canada might be. And that the Taliban would always consider us invaders, occupiers, and that the Taliban would always have greater resilience and greater endurance than Western forces. And of course, that's what the Taliban banked on. And the Taliban seems to, that calculation seems to be working out for the Taliban and not for the West.
All right, sir, just about a minute left. But what does the future of Afghanistan look like after Western forces withdraw from the country?
So I do think there's a lot of change that Canada and coalition forces have affected. And so it is not going to go back to the status quo ante. I think Afghan society will push back hard against sort of some of the extremely conservative efforts by the Taliban. And so I do think we see a considerable effort at modernization. But I think this will be a struggle, but a struggle that ultimately the Afghan peoples will need to work out for themselves rather than having Western countries work it out for them.
All right, Mr. Luprecht, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us as we took a look back at some of the most interesting, thought-provoking, and challenging conversations we have had on Forum Daily over the past year. But remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. Be sure to also check out the News Forum Network. We have programming on economics, politics, law, and social issues, and more. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Nima Rajan, and on behalf of Forum Daily, I would like to wish you and yours a Happy New Year.